Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? In case you're wondering, my gig yesterday went great. This particular band I play in, we play kind of early 60s feel-good music, so it's Mamas and Papas, Zombies, Turtles, all that kind of stuff. We actually played at a senior center, and the crowd was incredibly enthusiastic. I think I may start playing all senior centers from now on. Maybe not, but it was a lot of fun. Anyhow, this video has nothing to do with how great my gig went. We'll see how tomorrow's gig goes. It's outside, and it might get rained out. Anyhow, I want to talk about intentionally and unintentionally invoking mechanics in your narration in role-playing games, and sometimes how that can be really good, sometimes it can cause problems. And so the examples I'm going to give are things that I've seen recently. They all come from using the Ubiquity system, but these can apply to a lot of different games because it really just doesn't, it's not unique to that particular game. The first one is more positive, where instead of breaking immersion and engaging in all the game speak and say I want to use my empathy skill here, or let's do a diplomacy check, and out come the dice and what's the difficulty here. Instead, you can use the names of the skills or use words related to those skills kind of in your narration and kind of really slickly kind of get the point across, if your game master is astute and the other players are astute, that this is actually what you're doing. And I've seen some great examples of that. The other things I've seen which were more problematic were a couple of them where first of all there was times where the player, and I don't want to speak for him entirely, but I think I know what was going on in these examples, where a player used the name of a skill or a combat move or something, some kind of mechanic in the game, because it was synonymous with what they were trying to do, but they accidentally invoked a mechanic they really didn't want to invoke. The second one would be where the player wants to use a mechanic. They invoke the name of the mechanic, but they're not 100% aware of what the implications mathematically are of that. And in many cases, what they want the final outcome to look like, narratively, pretty much resembles the name of that particular operation or skill or whatever it is. So anyhow, let me stop being cryptic and give you the examples. In our All for One campaign, I've seen all the players do this, but I'll talk about what Anthony did in the session that I ran. And I can't remember the exact specifics. I haven't gone back and watched the scene. But there were parts where he was using like empathy, and he was actually trying to use intuition, which is a sub-skill of empathy. And you can specialize that if you want to. He hasn't happened to have done that with this character. But they're at a ball, or wherever they are, where he says, I really want to try to intuit, look into the hearts of men and see what's going on. I forget exactly how he said it, but I knew right away exactly what he was doing. He was invoking the empathy mechanic. And I was able to look right down on the little cheat sheet I had, see what his empathy score was, let him take the average. There really was nothing to find in this particular case. But I kind of gave I knew exactly what the target number would have been. I knew the fact that if there was something to find, I would have been able to do that by using the average without ever having to talk about it. So we didn't ever engage in game speak, but we both knew what was going on. So that can be really powerful. You could do the same thing with something like diplomacy and say, well, I'm going to try to persuade this guy of this. And you don't have to say, I want to use my diplomacy skill. Or, I'm researching this or searching around, and you're using your investigation. You don't really necessarily have to, stop game and say, I want to make this kind of roll now. Now, perhaps the game master, when you say that, when Anthony said, I want to intuit this, I say, well, you may want to roll in this particular case and stop the game that way. It depends on the situation. But it can be really powerful, and it can be something that it's a little tough at first, I've noticed, but it gets easier over time. Not only to do it yourself, but to see when other people are doing it. So that's not the first time I've ever seen it either. The second part was, I'll give you these two different examples, and I'm pretty sure I know what was going on. I've talked to Jason more than I've talked to Francois about this, but I'm pretty sure in both these cases I'm pretty dead on. The first one is early on in the All for One campaign. JDRD30, Francois, when he was getting attacked by somebody, would sometimes say, well, I want to parry the blow. And I believe what he meant was that he just wanted to defend himself. He uses defense action. However, in Ubiquity, parry is a very specific combat action, and it means you're going to forego your attack action for that round. And the benefit's going to be that you get a bigger die pool to use to defend yourself. So it's less likely you're going to get hurt in that particular round. I think that what he really meant was, I just want to defend myself. There were certainly some rounds where he said, yes, I want to go on full defensive. That's what I want to use. I want to use parry. But it's one of those things where you have to be careful that you don't accidentally invoke a mechanic that you really didn't mean to in the first place, because they make them sound like what they are, but we tend to use words that are synonymous with that. The second one was more recently where Jason, Dark Age of Roleplay games, were playing that Hex one-shot, that Hollow Earth Expedition that Anthony ran for us. And by the way, Jason is going to be running a Hollow Earth Expedition one-shot for Anthony and myself and for Big Mike, Tef's Tavern. That should be really cool. So we've been talking about that and getting excited and starting to think of character concepts and everything. However, there was one scene, I believe it was with a snake. There was a snake. I hate snakes. Well, my character hates snakes. Where Jason decides he wants to flurry and do multiple blows on the snake. Now that is an actual mechanic, and he meant to use that actual mechanic. But in this case, we were talking afterwards. He just wasn't aware what the mathematical implications of using that was. In particular, that you can attack twice, but you take a penalty, and mathematically, it doesn't really net you anything. And sometimes it can actually you'll be worse off for it. Mechanically, there's a lot of combat actions like that in Ubiquity. Not a lot, but there are some. And really, what happens is if you take that talent, if you invest your XP or your resources into that talent, like you invest into a flurry talent, like Etienne, one of the NPCs in our All for One game, then those penalties go away or get reduced, and you can be the guy that, like, man, he's so fast he attacked me twice. He's just that good. So that's why those mechanics exist, because the talents can kind of reduce those penalties and eliminate that. So at the end of the day, the cool thing about something like Ubiquity is, and it really doesn't even matter, it doesn't have to be Ubiquity. It could be old school Dungeons and Dragons, for crying out loud, because they're both abstract when it comes to damage. They're abstract length combat round. What does this really mean? When you do 6 hit points of damage, was that one sword blow or was that 6? What was it? Likewise in Ubiquity, he could have done 3 successful wounds to the snake. And okay, what does that look like? Is that one big whack where you really popped him between the eyes, or is it like this hail of blows as you're just beating the life out of the snake, with flailing fists? Which is it? It's up to you to narrate. Sure looks like a flurry at that point, doesn't it? So mechanically, what it looks like, what the visual was, cinematically, however you want to say it, then that result would have been a flurry. It just wasn't mechanically a flurry. So you can see how sometimes, language-wise, it's very easy to make mistakes one way or the other in games because we're using words that sound like what they are. The flip side of that is, with a little finesse, with a little practice, with a little understanding between yourself and the game master and the other players, and sometimes you may need to talk and say, hey, this is what I'm doing when I'm doing this, you're able to actually remain immersed and stay in character and all that good stuff, and not engage in so much game speak and kind of break the flow of the game. So that can be really useful. So it's a two edges of the same coin. So what do you think about all that? Have you experienced this? Can we talk about this? Have you heard about this? You read about this?